Welcome to Ryan's Running Reviews in partnership with Roadrunner Sports, and today we're taking a look at one of HOKA's most popular neutral daily trainers. It's the Mach 6, so let's run with it. Before we get started, I do want to say these shoes were provided to me by Roadrunner Sports. However, no one had a chance to preview this video, and this final synopsis is my own. I'd also like to say please leave a like on the video and consider subscribing. Here we go. The Mach 6 is a fan favorite. It is designed to be a up-tempo, lightweight, neutral daily trainer. However, in my opinion, I found it to do a little bit of everything. It's fairly versatile. It's also going to be a lot lighter and less bulky compared to something like the Clifton, which is HOKA's standard kind of do-it-all neutral daily trainer. So if you've tried the Clifton, you want something a little bit more streamlined, a little bit lighter, I think the Mach 6 will really shine through. This thing, while it's not perfect, I think is probably one of the better training options within HOKA's running shoe lineup. The shoe costs $140, which is about par for the course for this particular category. As far as the stack height goes, we have 37 in the heel, 32 in the forefoot for that classic HOKA 5mm drop, a relatively low drop if you put things into perspective. Now, what's funny is 37mm is not a low amount of cushioning. It's fairly high, gives you plenty of underfoot protection. However, in today's shoe market, most other neutral daily trainers are kind of at that 40 or well above 40mm mark, which makes this 37mm feel a bit more moderate in comparison. So yes, I know it's kind of funny to say 37mm used to be a ton of cushioning, but again, today, especially when compared to something like the Clifton, which I believe is over 40mm, feels a bit more moderate. However, the big, I think, stat here is the fact that the shoe for a US men's size 9 only weighs 8.17 ounces, which is pretty darn good, and I think is what really makes this shoe shine. The upper is a creel jacquard mesh, which is fairly breathable, and I do appreciate it as we get into these warmer months. The shoe does fit true to size with regard to length, and this is probably my biggest critique of the Mach 6. It's a rather narrow or low volume fitting upper, so if you have a wide foot, I don't necessarily think I could recommend this just because it is so snug in general. Now for me, it works quite well. You just notice it's a more snug foot, maybe not the most amount of room in the toe box. So it's just something you have to kind of keep in mind. Now, because you do have this low volume upper or snug upper, you definitely have a solid lockdown. Your foot is not going anywhere. The heel counter is rather stiff and rigid with a moderate amount of padding, no heel lift or anything like that. The lockdown here, I think, is spot on, which is nice for an up-tempo training shoe. As far as the tongue goes, it is paper thin and gusseted. Another, I guess, small critique here is I do wish maybe they add a few small foam blocks. I don't think it would break the bank with regard to weight if they just gave us maybe a bit more padding. It's fine, didn't create any issues, but I do like to have maybe just a bit more cushioning in this area. So overall, breathability I thought was spot on. Lockdown, awesome. You do have a narrow fit in general. So again, wide-footed people, this is definitely not your shoe. But for the most part, if you have a regular width foot or have a narrow foot, I think you will like this, especially if you like something a bit more snug and with a noticeable arch support sensation. The midsole is going to be a supercritical EVA, which is very resilient, has a little bit of squish and bounce to it, at least in this formulation. However, it's not the most energetic material, especially if you compare it to the Pива foams we see on the Mach X2 and some of their other racing shoes. However, I think it does a great job. It's fairly supportive, nice level of cushioning and impact protection. It has a little bit of life and pop to it compared to a more traditional EVA foam, which I do appreciate. And despite its moderate stack height, it does feel like it punches well above its weight, and I think that's due to the resiliency of this formulation of supercritical EVA foam. Now, again, despite the smaller midsole, it's actually fairly stiff and rigid for not having a plate. Sometimes we have these lower to moderately stacked shoes, they have a little bit more bend to them, and you can bend it fairly easily, but I wouldn't say it's the most flexible shoe in the world, which I think kind of adds some structure and helps you take advantage of that rocker geometry, as well as gives your foot just a tad bit more support. Now, part of the reason I think that the Mach 6 has a little bit of stiffness to it is the fact that if we flip it over to the outsole, there's no horizontal flex grooves. You do have this deep groove that runs the full vertical length of the shoe, which I think gives the foam some extra room to expand. But again, no horizontal flex grooves, at least from the outside that we can see. And that's part of the reason why I think this has a little bit more stiffness to it. The outsole traction pattern is fairly smooth with strategic rubber. I think it works quite well, but I wouldn't necessarily recommend this for grass or gravel just because it has more of a race day or up-tempo trainer-like lug setup. So how did this shoe perform? Well, it definitely excels at being an up-tempo daily trainer. There's no question there, but I honestly really liked it for kind of every other daily training run in between. I almost consider this Hoka's do-it-all neutral daily trainer just because it doesn't have such a large package. It's quite lightweight and feels very enjoyable underfoot. The supercritical EVA formulation that they have here, this particular setup, I think does a good job of not being too firm, not overly soft, and has a nice level of resiliency and a little bit of pop and energy return. Really like it just in general, and like I said before, it's probably one of Hoka's better neutral daily trainers. The only downsides, again, at least in my opinion, are the upper is a little bit narrow. It didn't create any pain for me, but I do like to have just a little bit more volume there. And supercritical EVA isn't the most cutting edge foam, especially with a lot of brands bringing their super foams into the more conventional daily trainers. I feel like Hoka's, but kind of want to step it up to a more aggressive daily training shoe with the Mach X2. Does have both supercritical EVA and PIBA foams with a plastic plate. So that's kind of the more aggressive stance that you can take. But for me, I thought this worked quite well as an all-round option and is a nice speedwork shoe as well, despite it not having a plate and no crazy energetic foams, even though I do quite like this particular implementation of supercritical EVA. Well, that concludes the review. Let me know in the comments what you think of the Mach 6, or do you prefer the Clifton? I would love to hear from you. I'm Ryan from Ryan's Running Reviews, and I'll catch you guys on the next one. Thanks.